As you may or may not know, I am a woman of many hobbies and some skill. And during both my career at Games Workshop and also operating within the Warhammer/hobby ecosphere in general, my insatiable desire to be good at everything means that I've taken on quite a lot of jobs and roles in my time. I've concepted miniatures, painted them up professionally, made illustrated box art, designed the boxes, laid out the rulebooks, executed studio quality photography, made construction booklets, presented high-end tutorials on how to paint those miniatures, and now I even run a company that releases those miniatures to the world. And whilst one could argue that I need to chill, it does mean that from start to finish, I have almost managed to become a one-woman miniature company. Almost. Because annoyingly, I have yet to conquer or even attempt arguably the most important step of all, which is sculpting the miniature itself. So in this video, we are going to find out together just how difficult it really is for us simpletons with a dream to try and sculpt miniatures for the first time with basically zero professional training, and see just how close I can come to becoming a bonafide miniature sculptor and designer from a complete noob in just 7 days. Because if I can do it, then I'm fairly sure that you can too. Whoosh. I know that for me personally, despite my lengthy background in art and design, and despite the fact I worked in a company where I sat next to 3D sculptors every single day, the process of actually making a miniature and 3D sculpting always felt like this big, unachievable, almost magical thing which I wouldn't even know where to start with. So I'm hoping that this video makes the whole getting started with 3D sculpting step seem a bit less scary for people like me who maybe just want to give it a go. So if you do find this video at all helpful, entertaining, or inspirational, or if you just kind of like the shapes and colors that you see here today, then consider liking the video, dropping a comment, and subscribing to my channel. Or if you really like what you see here today, then consider joining us on my Patreon, where you can support me and my weird attempts to benefit mankind through various hobbies even more, and unlock some exclusive stuff like access to our Discord and some painting tutorials. Thank you. But before I start to show you what I've been up to and all my work and how I got started and all that good stuff, I want to upfront say that this video is not really intended to be a professional tutorial or anything like that, because honestly, I do not know much about sculpting at all. Like I said, I've only just started and I've been doing about an hour a night for maybe just over a week. So I'm sure in this video I'm gonna get loads of things wrong, be super impractical, and generally look like I'm making a bit of a mess of the program. And if I do, I swear I'm not trying to spread misinformation, I'm just working it out myself. However, if you do have any good advice or tips for me or anyone else watching this who may want to get into 3D sculpting, then please feel free to pop it in the comments section below so we can all learn together. Anyways, I feel like the best place to start is at the very beginning. So let me quickly show you my new 3D sculpting setup and everything I use to get started myself. To sculpt, I am simply using my new tablet, which in this case is an iPad Air something. I think it's like 4 or 5, I can't remember, sorry. And I'm also using the app Nomad Sculpt. Now there are a bunch of different programs that you can choose for 3D sculpting, with ZBrush and Blender being some of the most popular and I think the most industry standard programs too. However, I heard from my friend Tina, who is an incredible sculptor, that she uses Nomad Sculpt and that it's a really easy and intuitive program for new people to get into, and you can export STLs from it. So that's what I decided to download. I honestly didn't give it that much thought. Sorry. So whilst I cannot lie, the iPad that I bought was pricey. The program itself was around £20 and is available on Android too, meaning that you don't need the highest end piece of kit like an iPad to get started on your own sculpting journey, and you can use a Samsung tablet or anything like that, which is really nice because I always find like the lower the barrier to entry for trying a new thing, the better. And as someone who has just been doodling for around an hour every night, I can honestly say that that I really like the interface and the way it all works, and I've managed to pick up most of the brushes and the ins and outs pretty quickly already. For a quick TLDR of how the whole program works, you start with a blob of I guess your digital clay or putty, and you can manipulate that blob in a bunch of different ways to make it look how you want. You can pull it around, cut shapes out of it, add clay to build it up, and carve away in a way which feels similar enough to actual sculpting. You can also place down a series of preset shapes which you can customize, like cylinders, boxes, spheres, and donuts, which can help you build up those initial forms and shapes and can aid you in making some cleaner, simpler designs or elements on your miniature. But I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, so now that you know what I use to get set up and kinda how the program works, let's go back to how I actually started my own sculpting journey. On the first night I got my hands on the app, I started out in probably the same way you'd expect, which is that I watched 0 tutorials and I just clicked on every single button and tried out every single tool in the sidebar. And I think that this toddler mode is definitely an important step when trying out any brand new thing. You gotta just take the dive and get your hands a little bit dirty and keep doing whatever this is over and over again because it looks kinda cool. After I had sort of worked out what some of the tools did and I was bored of doing the thing which looked cool, I decided that I would try and do what I do best, and that is make a scrunkly little goblin face. And please forgive me because I don't have any footage of the actual process of making this particular little goblin because I honestly didn't think I'd be making a video about it, so imagine just a lot of messing around like I did before and it ends up like this. But whenever I wanted to do something specific, like make a hoop for the earring or find out how to make a shape I had bigger or smaller, or if I got stuck and I didn't understand something, I would just Google it and lo and behold, the benevolent tutorial guys of the internet pulled through and there would usually be a YouTube short or something like that about how to do the exact thing I wanted to do, which made the whole process much easier. So a massive thank you and big love to all the tutorial guys out there for genuinely probably being the backbone of modern society. Thank you. But honestly, even though this was extremely rough and the first thing I had ever played around with, I was already hooked. It was already too much fun, so I knew that the next night I wanted to try and do something maybe a little bit more structured. Maybe. On the second night, I thought instead of just mucking around and seeing what would work, I would try and actually broaden my understanding of how the app worked. So I set myself a very simple challenge, which was to make a little mushroom man. It seems like every miniature company with any sort of fantasy range has some form of little mushroom guy, so this felt like a good place to start. And my main goal here, like I said, was to stop messing around and try and familiarize myself more with the program, and specifically practice building up my miniature using some simple shapes. A mushroom is essentially two shapes. You have the blob body and the big head cap thing on top, and anything else you decide to add is kind of extra. So I started by gently maneuvering the default blob into a more fitting blob, and then I added 2 little blob legs and some little blob toes by again doing some super simple shape placements and gentle manipulations using the drag tool. Shape, drag around, resize, clone, and flip. That is honestly how I made the bulk of this little guy's body, and it was super duper easy. For the face, I had seen a few people recommend using the mask tool to plot out where you want your recesses to be, and then use the gizmo tool to drag it backwards to create your inverted shape. And that worked out really well. Once I had my terrifying gaping eye and mouth holes, I smoothed them out and filled them in with 2 orbs for eyes, and then I used another orb for the teeth, which I flattened out, shaped a little bit, and then added a crease down the center for a bit more definition. And for the tongue, I did the exact same thing, and again, how simple is this? For the big mushroom cap shape on the head, Nomad Sculpt has this great little tool called the lathe tool, which lets you make these symmetrical pottery wheel style shapes, which is essentially like a instant mushroom shape generator, which was very handy for this particular project. And once I had put that in place and smoothed it down, because there is apparently a lot of smoothing involved in sculpting miniatures, I just added some little bumps again using the shape tool, and yeah, he was looking really cute and honestly way better than I expected him to. Because I wanted to push myself a little bit further, I decided to try and make him a little twig magical staff as well. So I used the tube tool, which I absolutely love, it is so useful, to make a basic twig-like shape. And then I flattened all of the curves on the tube using the flatten tool to make it look a little bit more angular and twig-like. Then I added a few leaves, which I made in a very similar way to how I made the teeth, and bam! I had successfully made what I think may be my first ever proper miniature. And to tell the truth, even though he's very simple, I am really proud of him and what I managed to do. But now I knew it was time to up my game even more and try and tackle something even trickier the next night. A lot of my incredibly talented artist friends say that the way they got that good is that when they were a beginner, they tried to replicate some of the styles of their favorite artists, and in doing so, they learned way more, way quicker than if they were to try and, I don't know, puzzle it out themselves. So in that line of thinking, I decided that my next art test would be to try and recreate as accurately as I could a pre-existing 3D object. And what better object than my childhood favorite toy, the classic Tamagotchi. The original 90s shell is pretty simple, and I found that Nomad Sculpt even has this reference image feature, which meant that I could literally overlay my clay onto an image of the Tamagotchi to help me get my shapes and angles just right. But that doesn't mean that this was in any way easy. In fact, not at all. It was actually way harder than doing my little mushroom man, because now I had a very smooth and well-designed standard to try and keep to. Whilst the initial egg shape and the cylindrical buttons at the bottom were pretty easy to make, I struggled a bunch with creating the square faceplate at the front of the Tamagotchi, and also with trying to make the little cracked egg design around the outside look sort of clean and structured and not like a blobby organic mess. But I persevered and I muddled through, and I think that eventually I got pretty close to the real deal. And I'm particularly proud of the little clasp ball keychain thingy at the top here. I think that came together really well. So yeah, all in all, I think that this was a great initial little challenge and exercise, and I highly recommend it too if you are also wanting to refine your basic skills a little bit more. Because my Tamagotchi exercise was actually quite mentally taxing, I decided that the next night I should try and do something a little bit more fun and creative to treat myself, but also do something which would help me use some features in the program which I hadn't used yet. I decided that I would use the Tamagotchi I had sculpted the night before, but try things like adding in textures and assets like teeth and horns, and then manipulate the base sculpture to make him look more like a demon chaos Tamagotchi. Fun. I started by downloading a scaly brush from the internet in order to give the Tama a little bit more texture, which is something I hadn't tried out before. And this took a little bit of getting used to, but eventually I found that applying it with a big brush at a low sensitivity worked really well. And I even managed to give it some cool, like Jurassic Park style scratches using some of the default texture brushes too. I dripped the buttons down using the drag and smooth tools to look all oozy and gross. And then I set about doing something which again I had seen online and I really liked, which is making some bony horns. To make them, all you need to do is open up a new file and create a bony little biscuit shape like this. And then you can use the array feature, which is really cool, to make a string of however many you want all together. You can then edit the radius and the curve to make the shape more horn-like and make it smaller towards the end, and it's super easy and it looks really good. I made a few different horns and some teeth too using the array feature again, and then I added them to my Tamagotchi using the add to scene feature, which is awesome. It just means that you can add any file to any other file you like, allowing you to make an asset library of things like horns, teeth, twigs, and whatever you want for your miniatures. I did a big gross tongue and whatever those little hangy things on our throats are called, added some more textures using the brush tools, dragged the gums around to look a bit more natural, natural, and that was that. I had myself a pretty cool looking demon Tamagotchi. Because this little revamp didn't take me too long and I wasn't feeling quite ready to call it a night, I went one step further and I tried out the coloring and rendering tools which are also included in Nomad Sculpt. And I guess this isn't super relevant to the video because we're talking about making miniatures for 3D printing, but it's still an extremely cool feature which I absolutely loved playing around with. You can go around your 3D sculpt and paint it with whatever colors you like, then you can even add metallic effects and a background and then also some sick lighting and visual effects until your very simple miniature looks absolutely baller. In fact, I had so much fun doing this that I went back and rendered my little mushroom guy and I accidentally made him glow, and I'm not particularly sure how I did that, but it just looks so cool and I absolutely love this feature. It really turns your 3D sculpts into works of art. At this point, I felt like I had an okay-ish understanding of the basics of the program, so over the next few days, I just kind of spent an hour-ish every night doodling in order to refine my skills further and build up some muscle memory with the program. I redid my original goblin head idea, which turned into this elfy-looking gelfling, which I don't love, honestly, but hey, it's much better than my original first attempt, so I am happy about that. I did this fat little hamster, which only took me like 30 minutes, but look, he can wear little hats and the mushroom guy can ride him, so that is a strong bonus. And then I spent ages doing this dog for some reason, which I didn't really have a plan for. Like I said, it was more of a sketch where I was seeing how far I could get by thinking I want something to look like this, and then seeing if I was actually able to actualize that in 3D, if that makes sense. It was a real mix of everything from shapes, cutting, blending, textures, and clever use of some of the tools that I'd learned so far. But I thought that for the sake of this video and your own entertainment, that I would try and do something really fun and out there as a kind of final challenge. So to mark my 1 week of trying to be a miniature sculptor, I thought that I would try and recreate everyone's favorite miniature, the Spacemarine. Well, they're not my favorite miniature. My favorite miniature is probably like a cloth goblin or something like that, but they're popular. That's what I'm trying to say. They're popular. So obviously, after just 1 week of messing around in a brand new program, there is no way that I can flawlessly recreate pristine Games Workshop Spacemarine armor. Like, that's unrealistic. I just do not have the skill or knowledge yet. That comes with years and years of practice, so give me a couple of years, please. So what I thought I'd do for this challenge is something a little bit more fun and organic and see what I could come up with if I tried to sculpt a Spacemarine helmet, starting with the default blob of clay. So I'm not gonna lie to you, for the first 30 minutes of playing around and trying to get my shapes right, this guy was looking pretty bad and quite freaky, but I did not give up and I trusted the process, and eventually, after a little bit longer, it started to actually come together. I was going pretty hard on the flatten tool here because I hadn't really used it a whole lot yet, so my Spacemarine helmet ended up looking quite creepy and angular and almost like it was made of bone. So I decided that I would lean heavily into that theme, and I tried to emphasize all of these little skull-like bone shapes all over the helmet, and I added in some texture and some sinewy tubes and those horns I made earlier too, and I tried to make the whole thing look a lot more like a Chaos Spacemarine helmet. And then when I felt just about done, I yet again couldn't resist rendering it up with some cool black armor and sinister shiny red eye lenses, which just looked really cool. Again, forgive me. But yeah, I ended up having so much fun sculpting my first weird Spacemarine helmet that I ended up making another one, which turned out a lot more Tyranidy looking in a way, but still very, very cool in my opinion, and I think they look really neat together too. And with that final challenge, I felt like I had completed my extremely sporadic self-enforced 7-day sculpting crash course, and I'd managed to sculpt a bunch of admittedly very random stuff, but stuff that I was genuinely really, really proud of. So it's all well and good for me to have these 3D renders looking all nice and pretty on my screen, but I'm someone who actually wants to make miniatures, and I want to encourage you guys to do the same thing, so I need to do the last step, which is turning my 3D sculpts into actual miniatures. Now, I am extremely lucky to not only have readily available access to a 3D printer, but also a pre-existing team of one sculptor and one miniature manufacturer who are readily available to help me complete this task. So trust me, I know that not everyone has access to these things, and it would be unfair and incorrect, I think, of me to imply that this final step is easy peasy and anyone can do it, because 3D printers are expensive, resin is scary, and the knowledge it takes to be good at 3D printing can take years to perfect. So if you do want to follow along with this final step and you don't have your own 3D printer, I recommend hitting up a friend or a local gaming store which does have a resin printer, or try finding an online or Etsy service who will print your STL file for you and send it to you for a small fee. Anyways, I chose a few of my favorite sculpts like the demon Tamagotchi, the Spacemarine helmets, and of course the little mushroom guy, because I thought these particular ones would translate probably the best into miniature form. Then I exported them as STLs directly from Nomad Sculpt, and then I sent those STL files to Tom the Rascaltown Sculptor. And honestly, he said that the STLs came out pretty good, and he didn't need to do a whole lot of prep for them to print out. He resized the minis to my desired sizes and filled in the gap behind the Tamagotchi's weird dangly thing, and then he laid them out on a print bed. Then all that was left to do was to send my finished files to our best resin printer, cross my fingers, and hope for the best. And I am pleased to announce that they came out absolutely wonderfully, like so much better than I was expecting. I truly thought that it wouldn't be this easy and we'd have to do a few print runs in order to get them anything close to what I had envisioned, but just look at them. They fell off the bone, they required very little cleanup, and they came out pretty much exactly how they looked on the screen. The helmets came out awesome and the exact size I wanted them to be, as they can now be used as McFarlane scale Space Marine heads. The mushroom guy is adorable and extremely chunky, but I think my favorite sculpt has to be the demon Tamagotchi. He's so cool, and I'm gonna have to find time somewhere to paint him up and make him an actual keychain. A very spiky and dangerous keychain. I may need to sand down some areas maybe first. The main thing that I think I've taken away and learned from actually printing them out is that I've realized just how deep I need to make my details and recesses in the future in order for it to translate into miniature form. You can see that those little sinewy details on the larger scale Space Marine helmet are pretty much gone when they appear to be well defined enough on my screen, and at actual 32mm Space Marine scale you can barely see any definition at all, so that'll be something I'll have to bear in mind when I'm sculpting miniatures in the future, because that is something I will definitely be doing. I'm gonna continue to try where I can to cram in as much practice miniature sculpting as I can to try and get better at it, which is something that I don't think I ever thought I'd do, because like I said, I always thought miniature sculpting was something which was too difficult and I could never do it. And I guess that's why I wanted to make this video today for you watching at home right now, because I think if I had seen a video like this, then maybe I wouldn't have been so scared to try something new that I really wanted to do. And even if just a handful of you decide to take the leap, try it out for yourselves, and you discover that you love it as well, then in a few years we could have hundreds of new miniatures to pick from, and maybe even a few new miniature companies too, which I think is pretty cool. But with that, I am afraid that is all we have time for today. As usual, thank you so much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for being rogues. I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Bye, friends!